Lisa, surely you understand that business takes priority over personal celebrations. Spencer Waters said dismissively as he straightened his tie, preparing to leave for another dinner with his boss Hugh Jerome. The restaurant fell silent. Salwater Dauper Sues. Beavis Hugh's jaw dropped. Actually, Spencer, I said, sliding the signed partnership agreement across the table.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
I think there's been a misunderstanding about who makes the business decisions now. Spencer's face went white as he read the letterhead. Jerome and Waters Consulting, co-managing partners, Hugh Jerome and Lisa Harper. I smiled sweetly at my stunned husband. Happy anniversary, darling. Oh, and you're fired. The champagne bubbled in my glass as I stared at the ceiling of our hotel room in San Francisco, watching the city lights dance through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 5 years ago, this would have been perfect. 5 years ago, Spencer would have been here beside me, celebrating our anniversary instead of across town schmoozing with clients at yet another essential business dinner. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to when Spencer Waters was just another ambitious project manager at Hartwell & Associates, and I was Lisa Harper, senior financial analyst at Goldman Sachs. We met at a corporate networking event in downtown Chicago, both of us young professionals hungry for success and recognition. You're the one who restructured the Morrison Industries deal, Spencer had said, approaching me with 2 glasses of wine and a genuinely impressed smile. That was brilliant work. You saved them $12 million in unnecessary overhead. I remember being surprised that he'd done his homework. Most men at these events either ignored the women entirely or made condescending small talk about the weather. Spencer was different. He listened when I explained my analysis strategies, asked intelligent follow-up questions, and never once suggested that my success was luck or that I'd had help from male colleagues. I've been trying to get Hartwell to implement similar cost analysis protocols, he continued. But I keep hitting walls with the senior partners. They're stuck in their old-school methods. That conversation lasted 3 hours. We moved from the main reception to a quiet corner booth at a nearby jazz club, talking about everything from restructuring methodologies to our shared frustration with workplace hierarchies that rewarded politics over performance. Spencer told me about his vision for modernizing project management, how he wanted to bring data-driven decision-making to an industry still running on handshake agreements and gut feelings. Most firms are leaving millions on the table because they won't adapt, he said, his eyes lighting up with passion. But imagine if we could change that. If we could show them how proper analysis and strategic planning could revolutionize their outcomes. I was captivated. Here was someone who shared my belief that intelligence and innovation mattered more than connections and tradition. When he walked me to my car that night, Spencer handed me his business card with a handwritten note on the back. Would you consider collaborating on something revolutionary? The collaboration started professionally. Spencer would bring me Hartwell's most challenging cases, the ones where traditional project management was failing, and I'd provide financial analysis and restructuring recommendations. We worked perfectly together. His understanding of operational workflows combined with my expertise in financial optimization created solutions that consistently exceeded client expectations. The Pemberton manufacturing turnaround was our first major success. The company was hemorrhaging money on a factory expansion that had stalled for 8 months. Spencer managed the timeline and resource allocation while I restructured their financing and identified cost-saving opportunities they'd never considered. We delivered the project 3 weeks early and 15% under budget. You two make an incredible team, Hugh Jerome had told us at the completion celebration. Hugh was Hartwell's biggest client, a real estate mogul who'd built his empire on strategic partnerships and recognizing talent. Have you ever considered going independent? Because I'd be your first client. That planted the seed. Over the next year, as our professional collaboration deepened into personal attraction, Spencer and I began talking seriously about starting our own consulting firm. We had the skills, the track record, and a potential anchor client in Hugh Jerome. More importantly, we had complete trust in each other's abilities. Waters and Harper Consulting, Spencer suggested one evening as we worked late in my apartment, surrounded by business plans and financial projections, partners in every sense of the word. The proposal came 6 months later on the observation deck of the Willis Tower, where we'd first outlined our business plans. Spencer got down on one knee with the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly behind him. "Lisa Harper," he said, his voice carrying that same passionate conviction I'd fallen for at the networking event, "will you be my partner in love, life, and business? Will you marry me and help me build something amazing together?" I said yes without hesitation. We were perfect together. Complementary skills, shared values, and a vision for success that neither of us could achieve alone. Our small wedding 6 months later felt like the celebration of everything we were building together. Hugh Jerome gave a toast that perfectly captured how I felt about our future. To Spencer and Lisa, he'd said, raising his glass in the intimate restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan, "Two brilliant minds who prove that true partnership multiplies success rather than dividing it. May your personal happiness be as extraordinary as your professional achievements." For the first 2 years of our marriage, that prediction seemed prophetic. Waters and Harper Consulting thrived beyond our wildest projections. We landed major contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies, expanded our team to 12 employees, and were featured in Business Week as Chicago's rising power couple in strategic consulting. I handled all financial analysis, contract negotiations, and client relations while Spencer managed operations, team development, and project execution. We were true equals, splitting both the workload and the recognition. Client presentations were collaborative efforts where we'd seamlessly hand off talking points, each highlighting the other's contributions. Lisa's restructuring analysis identified the bottleneck that was costing Peterson Industries $2 million annually, Spencer would tell clients. And Spencer's implementation timeline ensured we could address the issue without disrupting their core operations, I'd add. We were genuinely proud of each other's work and never competed for credit, but success has a way of changing people, and Spencer began changing in ways I didn't recognize at first. But that golden partnership was about to shift in ways I never saw coming. The 3rd year of Waters and Harper Consulting marked what I thought would be our greatest triumph. We'd just closed the Meridian Tower deal, a $100 million mixed-use development project that would reshape downtown Chicago's skyline. Hugh Jerome had recommended us to the development consortium, and our proposal had beaten out 3 major firms with decades more experience. "This is it," Spencer said, spinning around in his leather chair as we reviewed the signed contracts in our corner office overlooking the Chicago River. "This puts us in the big leagues permanently." I couldn't stop smiling as I organized the financial projections that had sealed the deal. My risk assessment models had identified potential cost overruns that the other firms had missed entirely, while Spencer's implementation strategy addressed every concern the consortium had raised about timeline management. "The Tribune wants to do a feature story," I told him, waving the email I'd just received. "They're calling it 'How 2 Young Entrepreneurs Revolutionized Chicago's Development Consulting.'" Spencer leaned across the desk and kissed me, tasting like the celebratory coffee we'd been sipping all morning. "Mrs. Waters, we are officially unstoppable." The interview took place 2 weeks later in our newly expanded offices. We'd moved from a cramped suite to an entire floor of the merchandise mart.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Complete with a conference room that could seat 20 and windows, offering panoramic views of the city we were helping to reshape. What's the secret to your partnership's success? The journalist, Jenny Kelly, asked as her photographer captured us reviewing blueprints at our shared workspace. Spencer and I exchanged the look that had become second nature, that wordless communication that happens between people who truly understand each other's thinking. We complement each other perfectly, I answered. Spencer sees the big picture and the human elements, while I focus on the financial realities and risk management. Neither approach works without the other, and we never let ego get in the way of what's best for our clients, Spencer added, his hand finding mine across the blueprint. When Lisa's analysis suggests a different approach than my initial strategy, I listen. When my operational experience identifies potential problems with her financial models, she adapts. It's collaboration, not competition. The article ran with a photo of us standing side by side in front of a scale model of the Meridian Tower project, both pointing to different aspects of the development. The headline read, "Equal Partners: How Waters and Harper Consulting Proves Two Minds Are Better Than One." Our anniversary dinner that year was perfect. Spencer had made reservations at Alinea, the kind of restaurant that required planning months in advance. We spent 3 hours savoring the artistic presentations while talking about everything except work, our recent trip to Tuscany, plans for the lake house we were considering buying, whether we were ready to start thinking about children. 5 years ago, I was just another project manager hoping someone would give me a chance to prove myself, Spencer said as we shared dessert, a reconstruction of a chocolate souffle that somehow defied gravity. Now I'm sitting here with the smartest woman I know, running a company that's changing how this city gets built. We're changing how it gets built, I corrected gently. This is our success, Spencer. Neither of us could have achieved this alone. He raised his wine glass. To partnerships that make us both better than we ever imagined we could be. But even as we toasted, I noticed something subtle in his expression, a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify, pride certainly, but tinged with something else, ambition maybe, or hunger for something more. The signs started small. A month after the Tribune article, Spencer began staying later at the office for calls that he described as exploratory conversations with potential clients. When I offered to review the financial aspects of these opportunities, he'd wave me off. Nothing concrete yet, he'd say. Just Hugh introducing me to some of his higher-level contacts. You know how these initial meetings go, all relationship building and vision casting. I'll bring you in once we get to the numbers stage. Hugh Jerome had indeed become more than a client. Over the past year he'd evolved into something approaching a mentor to Spencer. They'd started having regular lunches that Spencer described as strategic planning sessions, and weekend golf games, where they discussed industry trends and market opportunities. I was invited to exactly none of these conversations. Hugh appreciates having someone who understands the big picture, Spencer explained when I mentioned feeling excluded from these strategic discussions. You know how real estate guys are, they like to talk vision and legacy, not spreadsheets and risk assessments. It's nothing against your abilities, just different communication styles. The explanation seemed reasonable enough. Hugh was old school, definitely more comfortable with traditional relationship-building approaches, and Spencer had always been better at the schmoozing side of client relations while I excelled at the analytical work. But then came the Lakeshore Properties presentation. Spencer announced the opportunity during our weekly strategy meeting, describing it as the biggest potential contract in our company's history. Lakeshore Properties was Hugh's flagship company, managing over $2 billion in commercial real estate across the Midwest. They were looking to restructure their entire operational framework, a project that could take 3 years and generate more revenue than everything else we'd done combined. Hugh specifically requested that Waters and Harper handle the proposal, Spencer said, sliding a thick folder across our conference table. He wants our full analysis and strategic recommendations. I spent the next 2 weeks crafting the most comprehensive financial analysis of my career. Lakeshore's books were complex. Dozens of subsidiary companies, multiple revenue streams, and investment structures that required deep forensic accounting to fully understand. I identified 17 distinct areas where operational improvements could increase efficiency by at least 12%, along with a complete restructuring plan that would position them for aggressive expansion. Spencer, meanwhile, developed an implementation timeline that was ambitious but achievable, with clear benchmarks and accountability measures. We worked 16-hour days, surviving on takeout and coffee, pushing each other to create something extraordinary. The night before the presentation, we rehearsed our pitch until 2 in the morning. Every transition was seamless, every financial projection supported by operational reality, every recommendation backed by data that spoke for itself. This is the best work we've ever done, I told Spencer as we finally packed up our materials. Hugh's going to be blown away. Spencer smiled, but for the first time in 3 years, his enthusiasm seemed restrained. Yeah, he said quietly. This changes everything. The Lakeshore Properties presentation should have been our crowning achievement. Instead, it became the beginning of my systematic erasure from the company I'd helped build. We arrived at Hugh Jerome's headquarters, 15 minutes early. Our materials perfectly organized in matching leather portfolios. The building itself was a testament to Hugh's success. 47 floors of glass and steel in the heart of the financial district, with his name etched in gold letters across the marble lobby. Ready to make history? Spencer asked, as we rode the elevator to the executive floor. I squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar pre-presentation butterflies mixed with excitement. Let's show them what Waters and Harper can really do. Hugh's corner office overlooked Grant Park, the lake stretching endlessly beyond the windows. He'd assembled his entire leadership team, 6 senior executives who collectively managed billions in assets. These were the kinds of people who could make or break consulting firms with a single recommendation. Gentlemen, Hugh announced as we entered, I'd like you to meet Spencer Waters and his team from Waters and Harper Consulting. His team, not his partner, not his wife, his team. I told myself it was just Hugh's old-fashioned communication style, but something cold settled in my stomach as Spencer stepped forward to make introductions. Thank you for this opportunity, Hugh, Spencer said, shaking hands with each executive. I'm excited to share our analysis and recommendations for Lakeshore's operational optimization. For the first 20 minutes, everything went exactly as we'd rehearsed. Spencer presented our overall strategy while I provided supporting financial data. We moved seamlessly between speakers, each building on the other's points. The executives asked probing questions that demonstrated genuine interest in our approach. Then something shifted. These efficiency projections are impressive, said Sebastian Kelly, Lakeshore's CFO, studying my spreadsheets. But I'd like to understand the implementation challenges. How do you ensure these theoretical improvements translate to real-world results? I opened my mouth to respond. After all, I'd spent days modeling various implementation scenarios. But Spencer smoothly stepped in front of me. Great question, Sebastian, he said, clicking to a slide I'd never seen before. That's exactly why we've developed a phased approach with built-in accountability measures. For the next 15 minutes, Spencer presented what appeared to be my implementation analysis, but with subtle changes that simplified the complexity I'd carefully documented. He used my data, but stripped away the nuanced risk assessments that made the projections accurate. I stood there in my tailored navy suit, watching my months of work being repackaged as Spencer's insights. When I tried to add clarifying details about the financial modeling, Spencer would nod appreciatively and say things like, "Exactly right. Lisa has been invaluable in supporting the data collection for this analysis." Supporting the data collection, not developing the analysis. Not creating the strategy. Supporting. By the end of the presentation, Hugh and his team were directing all their questions to Spencer, even when they specifically concerned financial projections that only I could accurately answer. Spencer would field each inquiry, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like gratitude for my assistance. "Outstanding work," Spencer Hughes said as we packed up our materials. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking Lakeshore needs. I'll have my team review the proposal and get back to you within the week." As we left the building, Spencer was practically vibrating with excitement. Did you see their faces? They were completely sold. Hugh looked like he wanted to sign the contract on the spot. "Spencer," I said carefully as we waited for our car, "what happened to the risk assessment slides we prepared? The ones showing the potential challenges with accelerated implementation." He looked genuinely confused. "Those were too technical for the initial presentation. Hugh's team doesn't need to get bogged down in theoretical problems. They want to see solutions and results. We can cover the detailed risk analysis in the contract negotiations." The explanation seemed reasonable, but something felt wrong. Those risk assessments weren't theoretical problems. They were essential guardrails that would determine whether the project succeeded or failed spectacularly. "And the financial modeling section," I continued. "You presented my conclusions but not the methodology that supports them. Without understanding how we reached those numbers." Lisa, Spencer interrupted, his tone becoming slightly impatient. "I know you put a lot of work into the technical details, but these executives don't have time for deep dive analysis. They need the bottom line, delivered clearly and confidently. That's what closes deals." We drove back to the office in silence, my mind replaying the presentation and trying to understand why I felt so unsettled. Spencer had presented our work professionally and persuasively. The clients had responded positively. By any objective measure, the meeting had been a success. So why did I feel like I'd just watched someone else receive credit for my life's work? The pattern continued over the following weeks. Spencer began scheduling client calls during times when I had other commitments, a doctor's appointment here, a conference call with our accountant there. Nothing that seemed deliberately exclusionary, just unfortunate timing that meant I couldn't participate in preliminary discussions that were too early stage for detailed financial input. When I suggested rescheduling these calls to include me, Spencer would wave off my concerns. "Don't worry about the initial client conversations," he'd say. "You know how these real estate guys are. They want to talk vision and relationships first. I'll bring you in once we get to the serious planning phase where your expertise really matters." The serious planning phase that somehow never seemed to arrive. Our joint client emails began subtly shifting. Where we'd always signed correspondence Spencer and Lisa, Spencer started using Spencer Waters on behalf of Waters and Harper Consulting. When I mentioned it, he explained that single signature emails looked more professional and streamlined. "Clients want clear communication chains," he said. "Having multiple signatories can create confusion about who they should contact with questions or concerns." The logic seemed sound, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being gently pushed to the margins of my own company. When I brought my concerns to Spencer directly, he responded with reassurance that felt increasingly hollow. "You're being paranoid," he said, one evening as we prepared dinner in our Lincoln Park townhouse. "Just because I'm handling more of the client interface doesn't mean your contributions are less valuable. You're the analytical genius behind everything we do. I'm just the face that delivers your brilliance to clients. But I was starting to suspect that being the analytical genius behind everything was a very different position than being an equal partner in everything. And the distance between those two roles was growing wider every day. The Lakeshore contract arrived 3 weeks later. Spencer called me into his office with barely contained excitement. The signed agreement spread across his mahogany desk like a treasure map. "We did it," he said, pulling me into a celebratory hug. 3-year exclusive contract, renewable for 2 additional years. This is the biggest deal in our company's history. I scanned the contract terms, noting the scope of work that matched my recommendations almost exactly. But when I reached the signature page, my blood turned cold. The contract was between Lakeshore Properties and Waters Consulting Group. Not Waters and Harper, just Waters. "Spencer," I said quietly, "why doesn't this contract include our company's full name?" He looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Oh, that. Hugh suggested we streamline the business name for larger contracts. Waters Consulting Group sounds more established, more corporate. Harper was always kind of awkward to include, made the name too long and complicated." As he continued explaining the practical benefits of the name change, I realized something fundamental had shifted without my permission or even my awareness. Somewhere in the maze of strategic lunches and relationship-building meetings I'd been excluded from, Waters and Harper Consulting had quietly become Waters Consulting Group. The office relocation happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice until it was complete. It started with Spencer mentioning that Hugh had suggested we optimize our workspace for better client impressions. "The current setup is too informal," Spencer explained as contractors began measuring our shared office space. "When major clients like Lakeshore visit, they expect to see clear organizational hierarchy. Hugh thinks we need separate offices that reflect our different roles." Within 2 weeks, Spencer had moved into the corner office with the lake view, the one we'd originally planned to use as our shared executive space. My new office was down the hall, smaller but still respectable, with windows facing the courtyard instead of the water. "This actually works better," Spencer assured me as I arranged my financial analysis software on the new desk. "You'll have fewer interruptions for your deep analytical work, and I can handle the client meetings without disturbing your concentration." The logic seemed reasonable, but the symbolism was unmistakable. Visitors to our offices now met with Spencer first, in the impressive corner suite with its panoramic views and mahogany furniture. My office became a place they might be directed to if Spencer needed Lisa to run some numbers or check on the financial details. The business cards changed next. Our original cards had featured both names equally. Spencer Waters and Lisa Harper, co-founders, Waters and Harper Consulting. The new cards read Spencer Waters, managing partner with Waters Consulting Group in elegant script. When I asked about my new cards, Spencer handed me a box with my name and senior financial analyst beneath the company logo. "Titles matter in this industry," he explained when I questioned the change. "Clients want to know who's in charge of overall strategy versus who handles specific technical areas. This makes our roles clearer and more professional." Senior financial analyst. As if I were an employee who'd been hired to support someone else's vision, rather than the co-founder who'd built this company from nothing. The most devastating change came during a staff meeting 3 months after the Lakeshore contract signing. Spencer stood at the head of our conference table, addressing the 12 employees we'd hired together, outlining new organizational structures that would position us for our next phase of growth. "Effective immediately, all client communications will be streamlined through my office," he announced, clicking through slides that looked suspiciously similar to corporate hierarchy charts. This ensures consistent messaging and eliminates any confusion about decision-making authority. I watched our employees, people I'd interviewed, hired, and mentored, nodding along as Spencer effectively removed me from the chain of command. Jenny Waters, our marketing coordinator, was now reporting directly to Spencer instead of collaborating with both of us. Sebastian Jerome, our junior analyst, would be presenting his findings to Spencer first, who would then determine what information was relevant for client presentations.
What about the financial oversight responsibilities? I asked, trying to keep my voice professional despite the growing knot in my stomach. The quarterly reviews and budget planning that I've been handling, you'll still be handling all the technical financial work, Spencer replied smoothly. But I'll be presenting those findings to clients and the board. It creates a cleaner communication flow and ensures that our financial strategy aligns with overall business objectives. After the meeting, I cornered Spencer in his office, closing the door behind me with more force than necessary. Spencer, what the hell is happening here? 6 months ago, we were equal partners. Now I'm apparently a senior employee who reports to you. He looked genuinely surprised by my anger, as if the systematic dismantling of my authority had been so gradual that he hadn't noticed it himself. Lisa, you're overreacting. Nothing fundamental has changed about your role or your value to this company. We're just formalizing structures that reflect how we've been operating anyway. How we've been operating. Spencer, I built the financial analysis framework that landed us every major contract. I developed the risk assessment protocols that have kept us profitable while our competitors struggle. I created and you'll continue doing all of that excellent work, he interrupted, his tone taking on the patient quality he used with difficult clients. But as we scale up, we need clearer leadership structures. Hugh has been advising me on industry best practices, and this is how successful consulting firms operate. Hugh, always Hugh. The mentor who seemed to have unlimited access to my husband while remaining mysteriously unavailable whenever I tried to schedule meetings to discuss our company's direction. When exactly did Hugh become a partner in our business decisions? I asked. Spencer's expression tightened slightly. He's not a partner, he's an advisor, and frankly his guidance has been invaluable. He understands this industry in ways that neither of us do, and he's offering insights that could make us incredibly successful. We already are incredibly successful, Spencer. We built this company together, as equals. Why are we suddenly restructuring everything based on advice from someone who wasn't here during the hard work of building it? Because Spencer said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Hugh represents the kind of success we want to achieve. He's built a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. He knows what it takes to operate at that level, and he's willing to teach us. But only if we're smart enough to listen. The conversation ended with Spencer suggesting I take some time to adjust to the new structures and focus on what I do best, the financial analysis that would support his strategic leadership. That night, I sat in our home office staring at the wall where we'd hung our first business license. Waters and Harper Consulting was printed in official black letters, dated 3 years earlier when we'd been full of shared dreams and mutual respect. I opened my laptop and began reviewing our original partnership agreement, the legal documents that had established our equal ownership and decision-making authority. The words were still there, unchanged by Spencer's gradual reorganization of our daily operations. On paper, I remained a 50% owner with equal rights to company decisions. In practice, I was becoming an expensive employee in a business that increasingly operated as Spencer's personal consulting firm. The question was whether I was going to let that paper trail become meaningless, or whether I was going to start paying attention to what those legal documents actually protected. For the first time in months, I started taking notes on everything, every decision made without my input, every client meeting I was excluded from,
every streamlined communication that bypassed my expertise. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday, delivered by Spencer with the casual enthusiasm he reserved for social obligations he actually wanted to attend. Hugh's hosting a small gathering at his Lake Forest estate this weekend, Spencer said, loosening his tie as he entered our kitchen. Some of his key business associates and their wives. He specifically mentioned wanting you there. I looked up from the financial reports I'd been reviewing at our kitchen island, noting the subtle emphasis on wives. Not partners or spouses, wives. What's the occasion? I asked. Just relationship building. You know how important those connections are in this business. Spencer opened a bottle of wine, pouring himself a generous glass. Hugh says it's time I started networking at a higher level, meeting the people who really drive decision-making in this city. The estate in Lake Forest was everything I'd expected from Hugh Jerome. Sprawling, impressive, and designed to demonstrate wealth without appearing ostentatious. We drove through iron gates and up a tree-lined drive that curved past manicured gardens toward a house that looked like it belonged in a historical preservation society. Remember, Spencer said as we parked beside a collection of luxury cars, these are serious players. Real estate moguls, investment firm partners, city planning commissioners. The kind of people who can make or break consulting firms with a single recommendation. Hugh greeted us at the front door, immaculate in his navy blazer and perfectly pressed khakis. At 62, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in any room he entered. Spencer, excellent to see you, he said, clasping my husband's shoulder like a proud father. And Lisa, so glad you could join us. The other ladies are gathered on the terrace. I think you'll find them delightful company. The other ladies. I felt something cold settle in my chest, as Hugh gestured toward French doors leading to an outdoor space where I could see several women in elegant cocktail attire clustered around a seating area. Actually, I said, I was hoping to meet some of Spencer's potential business contacts. I'd love to learn more about the consulting opportunities you've been discussing. Hugh's smile remained perfectly pleasant, but something shifted in his eyes. Of course, though I think you'll find that most of the business talk tonight will be rather dry. The ladies usually prefer to discuss more interesting topics, travel, charity work, that sort of thing. Spencer was already being drawn into a conversation with three men near the bar, their discussion animated and clearly focused on business matters. I watched him integrate seamlessly into their group, his posture and expression shifting into the confident professional mode I'd fallen in love with years earlier. Lisa. Hugh was still waiting for my response, his expectation clear. I followed his gesture toward the terrace, where I was introduced to 5 women whose primary identity seemed to be their relationship to successful men. There was Margaret, married to an investment banking executive. Georgia, whose husband owned a construction company. Gina, wife of a real estate attorney who'd helped Hugh structure several major deals. How lovely that Spencer is doing so well, Margaret said after the initial introductions, sipping her wine as we settled into the comfortable outdoor furniture. Hugh speaks so highly of his strategic thinking. Spencer's certainly talented. I replied carefully. We've built the business together over the past few years. Oh, how wonderful that you've been so supportive. Georgia chimed in. It must be such a relief to have the financial pressure off now that the consulting firm is successful. You can focus on the things that really matter. I blinked, not understanding her assumption. Actually, I'm Spencer's business partner. I handle all the financial analysis and strategic planning for our major clients. The women exchanged glances that I couldn't quite interpret. Gina leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine concern. Honey, she said gently, Hugh told us you help with some of the bookkeeping and administrative tasks. That's wonderful. So many successful partnerships need that kind of support. But you don't need to oversell your role. We all know how hard it can be when our husbands' careers take off. I stared at her, my wine glass frozen halfway to my lips. Hugh had described me as Spencer's bookkeeper. Not his business partner, not his co-founder, not the financial analyst whose work had secured every major contract they'd signed. The bookkeeper. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I'm not Spencer's assistant. I'm his equal partner in Waters and Harper Consulting. I developed the financial frameworks that Waters Consulting Group. Margaret corrected gently. That's what Hugh called it when he was telling us about Spencer's success. My blood turned cold. Even here, at a social gathering where I should have been introduced as Spencer's business partner, my identity had been erased so completely that these women genuinely believed I was a supportive wife who helped with filing. For the next hour, I sat in that circle of accomplished women who'd been reduced to decorative accessories, listening to them discuss charity galas and vacation homes while their husbands shaped the business landscape of Chicago 50 feet away. Every attempt I made to discuss my actual work was met with polite smiles and gentle redirections to more appropriate topics. The secret, Georgia confided as the evening wound down, is finding fulfillment in your husband's achievements. When Joseph closes a big deal, I feel just as proud as if I'd done it myself. That's what real partnership means, supporting each other's strengths. Through the French doors, I could see Spencer deep in animated conversation with Hugh and two other men, their body language suggesting serious business discussions. No one had invited me to join them. No one had even mentioned that I might have relevant expertise to contribute. As we drove home, Spencer was practically vibrating with excitement about the connections he'd made and the opportunities that had been discussed. This could change everything for us, he said. Hugh introduced me to people who are planning developments worth hundreds of millions. They're looking for consulting partners who understand their level of sophistication. What about me? I asked quietly. Spencer glanced over, genuinely confused. What about you? Was I mentioned at all during these business discussions? Did anyone express interest in meeting the other half of Waters and Harper Consulting? Lisa, Spencer said, his tone taking on that patient quality again. These are relationship-building conversations. They're not technical meetings where we need detailed financial analysis. Once we start landing these bigger clients, you'll be essential to the actual work. But I was beginning to understand that being essential to the work was very different from being essential to the decisions. And in Hugh Jerome's world, those decisions were made by men while women provided decorative support. The introduction changes started happening at every client meeting, each one more subtle than the last, but collectively creating a narrative I barely recognized. I'd like you to meet my team from Waters Consulting Group, Spencer began saying when we walked into conference rooms. Not my partner, not my co-founder, but my team, as if I were one of several employees he'd brought along for support. At the Riverside Development presentation, Spencer introduced me as Lisa Harper, our senior financial analyst. True, but incomplete. At the Morrison Industries consultation, I became Lisa, who handles our technical assessments. By the time we reached the Pemberton Group contract meeting, I was simply Lisa from our financial department. Each introduction stripped away another layer of my authority, and what disturbed me most was how naturally the clients accepted these designations. When Spencer said I was the analyst, they directed their questions to him, and expected him to relay them to me for technical input. When he called me a department member, they assumed he was the decision maker, and I was there to provide supporting data. Actually, I tried correcting during the Pemberton meeting. I'm Spencer's business partner and co-owner of Waters Consulting Group. The clients looked confused. glancing between Spencer and me as if trying to understand why his employee was claiming authority she clearly didn't possess. Spencer smoothly intervened. "Lisa's being modest about her title," he said with an indulgent smile. "She's absolutely essential to our financial analysis work. I couldn't do any of this without her expertise. Essential to the work but not essential to the room. A technical expert, but not a business leader." The distinction was becoming clearer with every introduction. The worst incident happened during our 5th anniversary dinner, or what should have been our anniversary dinner. Instead, Spencer had scheduled a critical client meeting with Hugh and 2 potential investors who were only available that evening. "I'm sorry about the timing," Spencer said, as he adjusted his tie in our bedroom mirror. "But these investors are flying back to California tomorrow morning. Hugh says this is our only window." I stared at him from the bed where I'd been getting ready for what I thought would be an intimate celebration of our relationship and our business success. "Spencer, it's our anniversary. We made these reservations at Le Bernardin 3 months ago." "I know, and I feel terrible about it. But this is business, Lisa. This is the kind of opportunity that could set us up for life. You understand how important this is." "What I understand is that you're choosing Hugh and his investors over the anniversary of our marriage and our business partnership." Spencer sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hands in his. "It's not choosing anything over anything else. It's prioritizing what matters most for our future. One romantic dinner versus a potential $50 million project. There's no real choice there. There's always a choice, Spencer, and you're consistently choosing to exclude me from the decisions that shape our future." He stood up, his patience clearly exhausted. "Lisa, I need you to be supportive here. This meeting could change everything for us. I can't go in there worried about whether my wife understands that sometimes business has to come first." The meeting took place at Hugh's private club downtown, an old money establishment where women were permitted only in the main dining room, and only if accompanied by a member. Spencer called me from the car as he arrived. "The investors want to keep this preliminary," he explained, the sound of the valet service and city traffic in the background. "Hugh thinks bringing you tonight might make it seem like we're overselling our team size. These guys prefer to work with streamlined operations." "Streamlined operations, meaning you, meaning focused leadership, Lisa. Look, I'll fill you in on everything when I get home. Order yourself something nice from room service and we'll celebrate properly this weekend." I spent our anniversary alone in our apartment, eating takeout Chinese food while reviewing the legal documents that established Waters and Harper Consulting. The partnership agreement we'd signed 3 years earlier was crystal clear about equal decision-making authority, shared ownership, and mutual consent for major business decisions. On paper, Spencer couldn't make these commitments without my approval. In practice, he was apparently making them every day. When Spencer returned home 3 hours later, he was buzzing with excitement about the incredible progress he'd made with the investors. "They're interested in financing a massive expansion," he said, loosening his tie as he paced around our living room. "Not just consulting contracts, but actual equity stakes in development projects. We could be looking at partnership opportunities worth hundreds of millions." I asked. "Well, Waters Consulting Group, the company structure they're proposing would require some reorganization to accommodate investor interests, but Hugh thinks we can make it work." I set down my wine glass, something cold and sharp crystallizing in my chest. "What kind of reorganization?" Spencer waved his hand dismissively. "Technical stuff, corporate structuring to optimize tax implications and liability protection. Hugh has lawyers who specialize in these arrangements." "Spencer, sit down. We need to talk about what's happening to our company and our marriage." But he was already heading toward our bedroom, his phone buzzing with what he claimed were follow-up messages from tonight's meeting. "Can we do this tomorrow?" he called over his shoulder. I need to respond to these while the momentum is hot. This could be the biggest opportunity of our careers. Our careers. But as I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the takeout containers from my solitary anniversary dinner, I realized that Spencer had stopped thinking about our careers or our company or our marriage. He was thinking about his future, and apparently that future was being planned in rooms where I wasn't welcome, with advisors who saw me as a bookkeeper, and with investors who preferred streamlined operations that didn't include inconvenient partners asking uncomfortable questions. The next morning, I started keeping a detailed record of every meeting I was excluded from, every introduction that diminished my role, and every decision that was made without my input. The Harbor Point development presentation was supposed to be routine, a mid-level real estate project worth about $8 million, the kind of contract we could handle in our sleep. What I didn't expect was for it to become the moment that shattered any remaining illusions about my place in Spencer's vision for our company. Harbor Point's development team had requested a comprehensive analysis of their proposed mixed-use complex on Chicago's North Shore. I'd spent 2 weeks crafting financial projections that identified potential cost overruns in their construction timeline, and developed alternative financing structures that could save them nearly $2 million. "This is solid work," Spencer said as we reviewed my analysis the night before the presentation. "Really thorough risk assessment. They're going to be impressed." I should have noticed that he said, "They're going to be impressed," rather than "we're going to impress them," but I was still naive enough to assume we were presenting together. The Harbor Point offices occupied 2 floors of a glass tower overlooking the lake, all chrome and marble designed to project success and sophistication. As we waited in the lobby, I reviewed my presentation notes one final time, confident in the recommendations I'd developed. Spencer Waters and team from Waters Consulting Group, the receptionist announced as she led us to the conference room. Team. There was that word again. The Harbor Point executives were exactly what I'd expected. 3 middle-aged men in expensive suits who'd built their careers on aggressive development deals and political connections. George Harper, the managing partner, looked like he'd stepped out of a country club catalog. Joseph Kelly, their financial director, had the sharp-eyed intensity of someone who'd learned to spot profitable opportunities from across a room. "Gentlemen," Spencer said as we took our seats at the polished conference table, "thank you for considering Waters Consulting Group for your Harbor Point project." He clicked through the opening slides of our presentation, establishing the project scope and our analytical approach. Everything proceeded exactly as we'd rehearsed, with Spencer handling the overview, while I prepared to present the detailed financial analysis that formed the heart of our recommendations. Then Hugh Jerome walked into the room. "Sorry I'm late," Hugh said, settling into the chair beside George Harper, as if he'd been expected all along. Traffic from downtown was brutal. I looked at Spencer, confused. Hugh wasn't part of the Harbor Point project, and Spencer hadn't mentioned he'd be attending our presentation. "Hugh, glad you could make it," George said. "We appreciate you recommending Waters Consulting for this project. Your endorsement means a lot." Spencer's face lit up with an expression I'd never seen before, something between gratitude and desperate eagerness to please. "Hugh has been instrumental in helping us understand the sophisticated requirements of projects like Harbor Point," he said. For the next 20 minutes, I watched Spencer present my financial analysis as if it were his own work. He used my data, my projections, and my recommendations, but repackaged them with simplified explanations that stripped away the nuanced risk assessments that made them accurate. When George Harper asked about the alternative financing structures I'd developed, Spencer responded with a surface-level explanation that missed the critical details about interest rate hedging and tax implications. "Actually," I interjected, "the financing recommendation requires careful attention to the depreciation schedules because what Lisa is trying to explain, Spencer interrupted smoothly, is that we've identified some technical optimizations that could reduce your overall project costs. Technical optimizations. As if the $2 million in savings I'd identified were minor accounting adjustments rather than sophisticated financial engineering. Hugh leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Lisa handles the administrative details very well, he said to the Harbor Point executives. Spencer is fortunate to have such thorough support staff. Support staff. The words hit me like a physical blow. Here I sat in my tailored gray suit, with my MBA from Wharton and my 7 years of experience in financial analysis, being described as administrative support, while Spencer presented my work to clients who'd been told he was the strategic mastermind behind our success. Actually, I said, my voice carrying an edge I couldn't quite control, I'm Spencer's business partner and co-owner of Waters Consulting Group. The financial analysis you're reviewing represents my expertise in. Lisa's contributions to our analytical process are invaluable, Spencer cut in, his tone suggesting gentle correction of an overenthusiastic employee. But I think our clients are more interested in bottom-line recommendations than technical methodologies. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to cut. George Harper looked between Spencer and me as if trying to understand why the support staff was claiming authority over the presentation. Hugh's expression had shifted to something approaching amusement, as if he were watching a mildly entertaining demonstration of corporate hierarchy being properly maintained. Perhaps we should focus on the implementation timeline, Joseph Kelly suggested, clearly uncomfortable with whatever dynamic he'd witnessed. For the remaining 30 minutes of the presentation, I sat in silence while Spencer fielded questions about projections I'd developed, recommendations I'd crafted, and risks I'd identified. Every question was directed to him, every answer was credited to his strategic thinking, and every achievement was positioned as evidence of his leadership capabilities. When the meeting concluded, George Harper shook Spencer's hand enthusiastically. Excellent work, Spencer. Hugh was right. You really understand the complexities of our industry. As we gathered our materials, Hugh approached me with what appeared to be genuine concern. Lisa, he said quietly, you seem frustrated. I hope you understand that in presentations like this, it's important to let the lead consultant handle client communications. These executives prefer clear chains of authority. I stared at him, speechless. Here was the man who'd been systematically undermining my authority for months, offering advice about proper business etiquette, as if I were a junior employee who'd overstepped her bounds. The lead consultant, I repeated slowly. Spencer, of course, he's done excellent work positioning Waters Consulting Group for growth. You should be proud of the supporting role you've played in his success. In that moment, standing in the Harbor Point conference room with my husband accepting congratulations for work I'd done, and my supposed mentor explaining why I should be grateful for my supporting role, I finally understood what had been happening for the past year. I hadn't been gradually excluded from my own company. I'd been systematically replaced by a narrative where Spencer was the visionary leader, and I was the helpful assistant who made his success possible. The drive back to our office after the Harbor Point meeting passed in tense silence. Spencer was practically glowing with satisfaction, occasionally glancing at me as if expecting congratulations for his performance. I stared out the passenger window, my mind racing through everything I'd witnessed. That went incredibly well, Spencer finally said as we pulled into our building's parking garage. Did you see how impressed they were with the analysis? Hugh thinks this could lead to even bigger opportunities with their development group. I waited until we were alone in the elevator before responding. Spencer, why was Hugh at that meeting? He looked genuinely surprised by my question. He's been advising Harbor Point on their expansion strategy. It made sense for him to attend since he's the one who recommended us for the project. And when exactly did you decide to present my financial analysis as your own work? The elevator reached our floor, and Spencer stepped out ahead of me, his confident stride faltering slightly. "I didn't present your work as mine, Lisa. I presented our company's analysis. That's what clients expect, unified recommendations from the firm, not detailed attribution of who did what." I followed him down the hallway toward our offices, noting how he'd said the firm rather than our firm or our partnership. "Spencer, those executives think you developed those financial projections. They have no idea that I exist as anything more than your assistant." He stopped at his office door, keys jingling in his hand. "You're being overly sensitive about this. What matters is that the client is satisfied and we're likely to get the contract. Who gets individual credit is less important than the success of the business." "The success of your business, you mean?" Spencer pushed open his office door with more force than necessary. "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of following him inside, I headed to my own office down the hall. "It means I need to review some files. I'll talk to you later." I closed my door and sat behind my desk, staring at the stack of financial reports I'd been working on before the Harbor Point meeting. For months, I'd been telling myself that Spencer's behavior was just the natural evolution of our roles as the company grew, that his increasing dominance in client relationships was simply his strength in business development. But something Hugh had said during the meeting kept echoing in my mind. "Spencer's done excellent work positioning Waters Consulting Group for growth." Positioning for growth. Not building the company, positioning it. As if the foundational work had been done by someone else, and Spencer's contribution was strategic repositioning for the next phase. I opened my laptop and began reviewing our company's digital files, starting with the client contracts we'd signed over the past year. What I found made my stomach drop. The Meridian Tower contract, the one that had established our reputation with major developers, was filed under Spencer's digital signature alone, even though I'd negotiated the terms and developed the financial framework that had won us the deal. The Lakeshore Properties agreement showed Spencer as the primary contact, with my contributions listed in an addendum as analytical support provided by Lisa Harper, senior financial analyst. The Harbor Point preliminary agreement, which had apparently been drafted before today's meeting, listed Spencer Waters as lead consultant with no mention of my involvement at all. I spent the next hour digging deeper into our company's digital infrastructure, accessing files that Spencer had probably assumed I'd never think to review. What I discovered was a systematic pattern of documentation that erased my role as co-founder and repositioned me as a valuable employee. Email correspondence with clients consistently showed Spencer as the sole point of contact. Contracts were structured to position Waters Consulting Group as Spencer's firm, with other staff providing specialized support. Even our company insurance and banking documents had been quietly updated to list Spencer as the primary business owner, with my name relegated to authorized financial manager. My hands were shaking as I opened our original partnership agreement, the legal document we'd signed 3 years earlier when we'd incorporated the business. The language was crystal clear. Spencer Waters and Lisa Harper establish equal partnership in Waters and Harper Consulting LLC, with shared ownership, shared decision-making authority, and mutual consent required for any changes to business structure or ownership distribution. But according to every client-facing document I just reviewed, Waters and Harper Consulting no longer existed. It had been replaced by Waters Consulting Group, a company where Spencer held controlling authority and I provided analytical support. I needed to understand how this transformation had happened without my knowledge or consent. More importantly, I needed to figure out whether it was legally binding or simply an elaborate fiction that Spencer had been selling to clients. I opened our corporate filing records with the Illinois Secretary of State. What I found there made my blood run cold. 6 months earlier, Spencer had filed paperwork to officially change our company name from Waters and Harper Consulting LLC to Waters Consulting Group, LLC. The filing showed him as the registered agent and primary contact, with authority to make corporate decisions. My signature appeared on the filing documents. I stared at the screen trying to remember when I might have signed papers authorizing this change. Slowly a memory surfaced. Spencer had brought me a stack of routine corporate paperwork during a particularly busy week when I'd been rushing to complete analysis for 3 different projects. Just updating our business registration and insurance forms, he'd said, placing the documents beside my keyboard. The state requires annual filings, and our insurance company needs updated contact information. I'd signed the papers without reading them carefully, trusting that Spencer wouldn't ask me to authorize anything significant without discussion. After all, we were partners. We made major decisions together, except we hadn't been making decisions together. Spencer had been making decisions, presenting them as administrative necessities, and securing my authorization through deliberate misdirection. I printed copies of every document I'd found, organizing them into a folder that told a clear story, the systematic conversion of our equal partnership into Spencer's solo venture, with my unwitting legal authorization obtained through deception. As I worked, I became aware of voices coming from Spencer's office down the hall. I recognized Hugh's distinctive baritone mixed with Spencer's more animated tone. They were discussing something that had them both excited, their conversation punctuated by laughter and what sounded like congratulations. I crept down the hallway and positioned myself near Spencer's door, which was slightly ajar. "The Harbor Point deal is just the beginning," Hugh was saying. "Once you've proven yourself with this project, the real opportunities open up. I'm talking about developments worth hundreds of millions, Spencer. The kind of projects that could make you one of the most influential consultants in the Midwest." "I can't thank you enough for believing in me," Spencer replied. 6 months ago, I was just another small firm consultant. Now I'm competing for contracts that could change everything. You've earned it through your strategic thinking and leadership. That's what separates successful consultants from the technical people who just crunch numbers. Technical people who just crunch numbers. Like me. What about the restructuring we discussed?" Spencer asked. "The investor group you mentioned. That's still in development. But Spencer, you need to understand that those kinds of investors expect streamlined operations. They want to work with principals, not partnerships. If you're serious about playing in that league, you'll need to think carefully about your current business structure." I pressed closer to the door, my heart pounding as I tried to hear Hugh's next words. "Lisa's been invaluable in getting you to this point," Hugh continued. "But growth requires difficult decisions. Successful consultants eventually need to choose between loyalty to the past and commitment to the future." The folder of evidence in my hands suddenly felt heavier. Spencer and Hugh weren't just planning to exclude me from future opportunities, they were planning to eliminate me from the company I'd helped build. I backed away from the door and returned to my office, my mind racing with everything I'd discovered. Spencer hadn't just been gradually marginalizing me. He'd been systematically stealing my company with Hugh's guidance and my unwitting legal authorization. But if Spencer thought he could erase 3 years of partnership with forged signatures and misleading paperwork, he was about to learn exactly how thoroughly I understood corporate law and financial documentation. That evening, I made an excuse about working late and waited until Spencer left for his weekly dinner with Hugh. Once the office was empty, I returned to Spencer's office with the spare key I'd kept from our early days when we'd shared the space. His desk was meticulously organized, exactly as it had been when we'd worked side by side. But now I was looking at it with different eyes, searching for evidence of the deception I'd begun to uncover. The locked drawer on the right side of his desk had always been where Spencer kept our most sensitive contracts and financial documents. I'd never thought to question why he'd started locking it 6 months ago, accepting his explanation that we needed better security for client confidentiality. Inside, I found a manila folder labeled Corporate Restructuring Mentor Confidential. My hands trembled as I opened it and began reading documents that revealed the full scope of Spencer's plans. The first document was a business proposal titled Waters Consulting Group Strategic Expansion Plan. It outlined a vision for transforming our small consulting firm into a major player in Midwest development consulting, with projected revenues of over $50 million within 5 years. The plan was brilliant, comprehensive, and written entirely in Spencer's voice. There was no mention of me anywhere in the document, except in a section labeled Current Staff Transition, where I was listed as Senior Financial Analyst, Potential Retention for Specialized Projects. Potential retention. As if I were an employee whose continued employment was under consideration, rather than the co-founder who developed half the strategies the plan promised to implement. The second document was even more devastating. A letter of intent between Spencer and Hugh's investment group, outlining terms for a partnership that would provide Waters Consulting Group with $20 million in capital backing in exchange for equity stakes and board representation. According to the letter, Spencer would retain controlling ownership while the investment group would gain 30% equity and significant influence over major business decisions. The partnership would be structured to optimize leadership efficiency and eliminate redundant decision-making processes. Redundant decision-making processes. That was how they described the equal partnership Spencer and I had built together. But the most shocking discovery was a series of email exchanges between Spencer and someone named Sebastian Kelly at Meridian Financial Services. The emails detailed plans to transfer all of Waters Consulting Group's assets and client contracts to a new corporate entity that would be wholly owned by Spencer. As we discussed, one email read, "The current partnership structure creates complications for the investor arrangement. We need clean ownership before we can proceed with the capital infusion. The transfer should be completed by the end of Q3, with all client contracts reassigned to the new entity." Spencer's response was chilling in its casualness. Agreed. I've been gradually transitioning client relationships to reflect single-point leadership anyway. Lisa won't be an issue. She's been focused on the technical work and hasn't been involved in strategic planning for months. I photographed every document with my phone, my anger building with each page. Spencer hadn't just been marginalizing me, he'd been systematically planning to steal the company we built together, with the help of advisors who saw me as an obstacle to be eliminated. The final folder contained the most damaging evidence: recordings. Spencer had apparently been documenting his conversations with Hugh and other advisors, probably for legal protection as they restructured the business. I found a small digital recorder with dozens of files dating back 6 months. I plugged the recorder into Spencer's computer and began listening to conversations that revealed the calculated nature of everything that had been happening. Lisa's biggest weakness is that she trusts too much. Hugh's voice came through the speakers clearly. She assumes good faith in every interaction, which makes her vulnerable to strategic repositioning. She still thinks we're equal partners, Spencer replied. But that dynamic doesn't work for the kind of growth we're planning. Investors want clear authority structures, not collaborative decision-making. The key is gradual transition, Hugh advised. Don't make dramatic changes that will trigger legal challenges. Just slowly shift client relationships and operational control until the partnership becomes irrelevant in practice. I listened to recording after recording, documenting months of conversations where Spencer and Hugh discussed my management as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a partner with legal rights. In one particularly revealing exchange from 3 weeks earlier, Spencer had expressed concern about my growing awareness of the changes. Lisa's starting to ask questions about client meetings and corporate filings, he said. She's not stupid, Manitas. Eventually she's going to figure out what's happening. By then it won't matter, Hugh replied confidently. Once the investor deal is finalized and the corporate transfer is complete, her partnership claims won't have any practical value. She can either accept a consulting position with the new entity or pursue legal action that will take years to resolve. And in the meantime, keep her focused on technical work and exclude her from strategic decisions. The more isolated she becomes from actual business operations, the harder it will be for her to claim ongoing partnership rights. I sat in Spencer's office until nearly midnight, copying files and organizing evidence that painted a clear picture of deliberate fraud. Spencer and Hugh had been planning to steal my company for months, using my own signatures against me and my trust in our marriage to facilitate the theft. But they'd made one critical error. They'd documented everything. Spencer's obsession with legal protection and Hugh's insistence on recorded conversations had created a comprehensive record of their conspiracy. Every email, every recording, every filed document would serve as evidence in the legal action they were so confident I wouldn't pursue. As I locked Spencer's desk and prepared to leave, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in how I viewed our marriage and our business. The man I'd fallen in love with, the partner I'd trusted with my professional future, had been systematically betraying me for months while pretending nothing had changed. But Spencer had underestimated one crucial factor in his strategic planning. I wasn't just a financial analyst who focused on technical work. I was a financial analyst who understood corporate law, contract enforcement, and exactly how to build an airtight legal case. If Spencer wanted to play games with documentation and investor partnerships, he was about to discover that I was much better at reading fine print than he'd ever imagined. The next morning, I called in sick and spent the day researching corporate attorneys who specialized in partnership disputes and business fraud. Spencer's carefully documented conspiracy was about to become the foundation of my counterattack. The law offices of Morrison, Blake & Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a downtown tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the Chicago River. Georgia Morrison, the senior partner specializing in business fraud, reviewed my documentation with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. "This is extremely well organized," she said, flipping through the folders I'd compiled over the past week. "Your husband and his advisor have been remarkably thorough in documenting their conspiracy." I watched her face as she reviewed the email exchanges, the recorded conversations, and the corporate filings that told the story of my systematic erasure from Waters Consulting Group. "What's my legal position?" I asked. Georgia leaned back in her leather chair, removing her reading glasses. "Strong, potentially devastating for them, if we can prove the pattern of fraudulent misrepresentation. But I need to understand the full scope of what they've done. Have you examined your personal financial accounts?" The question hit me like ice water. In my focus on the business fraud, I hadn't considered whether Spencer's deception extended to our personal finances. "Our joint accounts have been stable," I said slowly. "We maintain separate checking accounts but share savings and investment accounts. Spencer handles most of the banking coordination since his name is on our business accounts." Georgia's expression grew more serious. "Mrs. Waters, I strongly recommend you conduct a comprehensive review of all shared financial instruments immediately. Business fraud often coincides with personal financial manipulation, especially in marriage situations where one partner has assumed control of financial management." That afternoon, I drove directly to our bank and requested detailed statements for every account that bore both our names. What I discovered made my earlier findings look like minor accounting errors. Spencer had been systematically transferring money from our joint savings account to a personal investment account I'd never heard of. Over the past 8 months, nearly $180,000 had been moved in transfers small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but large enough to constitute a substantial portion of our shared wealth. The investment account was registered solely in Spencer's name, with Hugh Jerome listed as the designated financial advisor. The account statement showed aggressive investments in real estate development funds, many of which were connected to Hugh's business network. But the most shocking discovery was a life insurance policy Spencer had taken out on me 6 months earlier. The policy was for $2.5 million, with Spencer as the sole beneficiary. According to the documentation, I had supposedly authorized the policy by signing an application form. I stared at the signature that looked remarkably like mine, but felt wrong in subtle ways. The pressure was different, the letter formation slightly off. Spencer had forged my signature on a life insurance policy that would make my death financially beneficial to him. My hands were shaking as I called Georgia Morrison from the bank parking lot. "Get to my office immediately," she said after I described what I'd found. "And Lisa, don't go home tonight. Stay in a hotel and pay with cash. We need to treat this as a potential safety issue until we understand exactly what your husband has been planning." The next morning, Georgia's investigative team had uncovered additional evidence that painted an even more disturbing picture. Spencer had been in contact with a private investigator named Hugh Kelly, apparently no relation to Hugh Jerome, who specialized in personal risk assessment and lifestyle analysis. The investigator's reports, which we obtained through legal discovery requests, detailed my daily routines, my driving routes, my exercise habits, and my health information. The reports read like surveillance documents prepared for someone planning either blackmail or worse. "Your husband has been having you watched for months," Georgia explained as we reviewed the investigator's files. "These reports document your schedule in extraordinary detail, including times when you're alone and vulnerable." I felt sick as I read descriptions of my morning runs along the lakefront, my weekly grocery shopping trips, my evening yoga classes. Someone had been following me, photographing me, documenting my life as if I were a target rather than a wife. The final piece of evidence came from Spencer's credit card statements, which showed payments to several concerning service providers. A locksmith who'd apparently changed the locks on our home office, a document storage company that was housing files I'd never authorized, and most ominously, a consultation fee paid to a firm specializing in accidental death insurance claim processing. "Mrs. Waters," Georgia said, her voice carefully controlled, "I need to ask you directly. Do you believe your husband poses a physical threat to your safety?" The question should have seemed absurd. Spencer was my husband, my business partner, the man I'd shared dreams and built a life with. But as I sat in that law office, surrounded by evidence of months of calculated deception and potential insurance fraud, I realized I no longer knew who Spencer really was. "I don't know," I admitted. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. Today I'm not sure of anything. Georgia nodded grimly. "Given the life insurance policy and the surveillance reports, we're going to proceed under the assumption that your safety is at risk. I'm arranging for a secure apartment where you can stay while we prepare the legal action. We're also going to coordinate with law enforcement, because some of what we've uncovered may constitute criminal fraud." As I signed the retainer agreement that would make Georgia my legal representation, I realized that Spencer's betrayal went far beyond stealing our company. He'd been planning to eliminate me entirely, professionally, financially, and possibly physically. But Spencer had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate planning. He'd underestimated my intelligence, my resourcefulness, and my determination to protect what I'd built. If he wanted to play games with forged signatures and life insurance policies, he was about to discover that I was far more dangerous than the compliant wife he thought he'd been manipulating. The woman who'd poured coffee while being dismissed was gone. In her place was someone who understood exactly how to use Spencer's own documentation against him, and who had no intention of being anyone's victim. The secure apartment Georgia had arranged was a sterile corporate housing unit in River North, furnished with the kind of generic furniture that hotels use. I sat at the small dining table, surrounded by boxes of evidence that told the story of how completely Spencer had betrayed our marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Spencer, "Working late again. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you." The casual lie stung more than the elaborate fraud. Even as he planned to steal everything I'd built, Spencer was still playing the role of devoted husband. I was organizing financial records when I noticed something odd in our joint credit card statements. Spencer had been making regular payments to something called Riverside Storage Solutions for the past 4 months. I'd never heard of the company, and we didn't have any storage needs that would require ongoing monthly fees. A quick internet search revealed that Riverside Storage specialized in document storage and business records management. Their services included secure filing for sensitive corporate documents and discrete archival solutions for business transitions. The next morning, I called Riverside Storage and posed as Spencer's assistant, explaining that I needed to access our stored materials for an audit. The storage manager was surprisingly helpful. "Of course, Mrs. Waters. Your husband has been storing quite a bit of material with us. Unit 47B contains primarily business documents and some personal files. Do you need the access code?" Unit 47B contained 4 filing cabinets filled with documents that Spencer had systematically removed from our office and our home. As I reviewed the contents, a picture emerged of planning that went back over a year. Spencer had been creating duplicate copies of every important document in our business and our marriage, but with subtle alterations. Client contracts that originally showed both our names now existed in versions that listed only Spencer as the consulting firm representative. Our mortgage documents had been copied with modifications that positioned Spencer as the primary borrower. Even our prenuptial agreement existed in a revised version that allocated different asset distributions than what I remembered signing. But the most devastating discovery was a folder labeled Lisa Muss Personal Information. Inside were copies of my medical records, my psychological evaluation from 3 years ago when we'd applied for life insurance, and detailed financial records showing my spending patterns and personal habits. Most disturbing was a psychological profile that someone had prepared based on this information. The document analyzed my behavioral patterns and emotional vulnerabilities, concluding that I was conflict-averse and likely to accept gradual status changes rather than pursuing confrontational legal action. Spencer hadn't just been planning to steal my company, he'd been studying me like a lab specimen, identifying my weaknesses and designing his betrayal to exploit my trusting nature. At the bottom of the psychological profile was a handwritten note in Hugh's distinctive script. Subject shows consistent pattern of deferring to authority figures and avoiding confrontation. Gradual marginalization strategy should be effective provided changes appear reasonable and legally justified. Subject: they'd been referring to me as a subject in their fraud conspiracy. I photographed everything in the storage unit, my anger crystallizing into something harder and more focused. Spencer and Hugh had spent months analyzing my psychology to manipulate me more effectively. They'd treated our marriage and our business partnership as a con game where I was the mark, but their psychological profile had missed one crucial detail about my character. When pushed too far, I didn't defer to authority figures or avoid confrontation. I became methodical, strategic, and absolutely relentless in pursuing justice. Back at Georgia Morrison's office, we spread the storage unit documents across her conference table like pieces of a complex puzzle. What emerged was a pattern of systematic fraud that went far beyond what either of us had initially suspected. "This changes everything," Georgia said, studying the forged prenuptial agreement. "Your husband hasn't just been planning business fraud, he's been preparing for complete asset seizure in the event of divorce or your death." She pointed to specific clauses in the altered prenup that would have given Spencer controlling rights to all marital property, including assets I'd brought into the marriage independently. "But here's the critical factor," she continued, pulling out our original partnership agreement. "Spencer's entire fraud depends on these forged documents being accepted as legitimate. But we have something he doesn't know about." Georgia opened a legal brief her team had prepared overnight. "I've been researching the corporate filings your husband submitted to change your company name and structure. He forged your signature on multiple documents. But Illinois corporate law has specific protections against exactly this type of fraud." She highlighted a section of state business code that I'd never seen before. Section 805 ILC, S 180-15-5, requires that any significant changes to LLC ownership or structure must be authorized by notarized signatures from all original partners. The documents your husband filed lack proper notarization of your signature. My heart began racing as I understood the implications. That means the corporate restructuring is invalid. Not just invalid, it's criminal fraud. But more importantly for our purposes, it means that Waters and Harper Consulting still legally exists as your original partnership, and Spencer has no authority to make business decisions without your consent. Georgia pulled out another document. "I've also discovered something interesting about Hugh Jerome's role in this conspiracy. Your husband's mentor isn't just offering friendly business advice." She slid a corporate filing across the table. "Hugh has been planning to acquire Waters Consulting Group through his investment fund once Spencer completes the ownership transfer. This isn't just partnership fraud, it's an elaborate scheme to steal your company for Hugh's real estate empire." The documentation showed that Hugh's investment group was actually a shell company designed to acquire smaller consulting firms and absorb them into his larger business operations. Spencer wasn't being groomed as a protégé, he was being used as an unwitting accomplice in Hugh's acquisition strategy. "Your husband thinks he's going to become a major player in Hugh's organization," Georgia explained. "In reality, Hugh plans to eliminate Spencer once the company transfer is complete. Spencer is just as much a victim of this conspiracy as you are. He's just too blinded by ambition to realize it." But the most powerful weapon Georgia had discovered was hidden in the fine print of Spencer's own documentation. In his eagerness to cover all legal bases, Spencer had included termination clauses in his corporate restructuring that could be triggered by fraud, misrepresentation, or breach of fiduciary duty. "Your husband wrote his own legal destruction," Georgia said with satisfaction. "These clauses mean that any evidence of deceptive practices automatically voids his claims to company ownership and returns full control to the defrauded partner." She handed me a legal brief that would serve as our primary weapon. "We're going to use Spencer's own contracts against him. Every forged signature, every unauthorized transfer, every violation of your partnership rights triggers these penalty clauses he included to protect himself." I stared at the evidence that would destroy Spencer's carefully constructed conspiracy. He'd been so focused on manipulating me that he'd failed to protect himself against the consequences of his own fraud. "When do we strike?" I asked. The next morning I returned to our office for the first time in a week, carrying myself with the composure of someone who'd spent days preparing for war. Spencer looked up from his computer with genuine surprise as I entered his office. "Lisa, I was wondering where you'd been. Are you feeling better? You've seemed off lately." I settled into the chair across from his desk, noting how he'd rearranged the furniture to create more distance between us. "I'm feeling much better, actually. Clearer than I have in months. Good, because today's a big day. The investor presentation is this afternoon, and Hugh thinks we're on the verge of something incredible. Spencer's excitement was palpable, completely oblivious to the legal documents hidden in my briefcase. Tell me about these investors, I said casually. I'd like to understand what we're committing to. Spencer's enthusiasm faltered slightly. Well, it's preliminary still, just exploratory discussions about potential capital partnerships. Nothing that requires your direct involvement at this stage. Spencer, we're married and we're business partners. Everything we do requires my involvement. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly remembering our recent conversations about exclusion from strategic decisions. Of course you're right. I just meant that these initial meetings tend to focus on big-picture vision rather than detailed financial analysis. I smiled, thinking about the comprehensive financial analysis I'd actually prepared, one that would expose exactly how Hugh's investment was actually a hostile acquisition disguised as partnership. Actually, I've prepared some materials that might be useful for today's presentation, I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out a folder. Financial projections and risk assessments based on the corporate structure you've been developing. Spencer's face lit up. That's fantastic. I knew you'd come around to understanding the opportunity here. Hugh will be impressed that you've taken initiative on this. For the next hour, I listened to Spencer describe his vision for Waters Consulting Group's future, noting how completely he'd bought into Hugh's manipulation. Spencer genuinely believed he was building an empire, not realizing he was being positioned for elimination once his usefulness ended. The investor presentation is at Hugh's offices at 3, Spencer said as we wrapped up our conversation. Hugh suggested you might want to attend as an observer, to see how these high-level discussions work. An observer, even when inviting me to witness my own company's theft, Spencer positioned me as a student rather than a participant. I'll be there, I said. But Spencer, I think there are some corporate governance issues we should discuss first. Some discrepancies I've noticed in our recent filings. His confident expression flickered for just a moment. What kind of discrepancies? Nothing major, I lied smoothly. Just some signature authorizations and ownership documentation that might need clarification before we engage with outside investors. You know how careful I am about legal details. Of course, Spencer replied, but I could see concern creeping into his eyes. We can review whatever you found after the presentation. Today's too important to get bogged down in administrative details. Administrative details, like the felony fraud charges he was about to face. I spent the afternoon coordinating with Georgia Morrison's legal team, positioning them strategically for what would happen at Hugh's offices. Meanwhile, I'd arranged for someone Spencer would never expect to attend the investor presentation. Jenny Kelly, the business journalist who'd written our feature story 2 years earlier. Jenny had been fascinated when I'd contacted her about a major story involving corporate fraud and conspiracy in Chicago's consulting industry. She'd jumped at the chance to cover what I'd described as a David versus Goliath tale of a female entrepreneur fighting back against systematic business theft. This is going to be front-page material, Jenny had said, when I'd outlined the evidence we'd gathered. Corporate fraud, forged documents, potential insurance scams, and all of it documented by the perpetrators themselves. When do you want me there? 3 o'clock, I'd replied. And Jenny, bring a photographer. This is going to be the kind of story that people remember. As I prepared to leave for Hugh's offices, I felt a strange calm settling over me. For months, I'd been fighting a battle I didn't even know I was in, watching my authority erode while Spencer claimed credit for work I'd done. Today, Spencer was going to present his vision for stealing my company to investors who thought they were acquiring legitimate assets. Instead, they were going to witness the spectacular collapse of a conspiracy that had been months in the making. Spencer thought he was about to become a major player in Chicago's development industry. He was actually about to become the subject of a criminal investigation and a front-page fraud exposé. The best part was that he'd written the evidence we'd use to destroy him, recorded the conversations that would convict him, and invited all the witnesses we'd need to ensure his downfall was as public as possible. Hugh Jerome's conference room was a monument to intimidation, 40 feet of polished mahogany tables surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River, and the walls displayed photographs of Hugh's development projects stretching across 3 decades. Spencer arrived early, his confidence radiating as he arranged his presentation materials. He'd dressed for the occasion in his most expensive suit, the one I'd helped him pick out for our wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Lisa, I'm surprised you decided to join us," Hugh said as I entered, his tone carefully neutral. "Spencer mentioned you'd been having some concerns about the corporate restructuring." "Just due diligence questions," I replied smoothly. "I thought it would be helpful to understand the investor perspective on our transition." The investors began arriving at exactly 3 o'clock. There were 5 of them, serious men in their 50s and 60s who carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to making million-dollar decisions quickly. They represented pension funds, real estate investment trusts, and private equity groups with combined assets in the billions. What they didn't know was that Jenny Kelly was positioned in the adjacent conference room, recording everything through equipment George's team had strategically placed. The legal discovery we'd obtained included authorization to document any meetings where fraudulent business practices were discussed. Spencer began his presentation with the polished enthusiasm I'd fallen in love with years earlier. He outlined Waters Consulting Group's growth trajectory, highlighting our major contracts and projected expansion into multi-state operations. "Our competitive advantage lies in streamlined decision-making and specialized expertise," Spencer explained, clicking through slides that showcased projects I'd designed and analyzed. "We've eliminated operational redundancies that typically slow down consulting firms." Operational redundancies. That's how Spencer described removing me from the company I'd co-founded. For 20 minutes, Spencer presented my work as his vision, my financial strategies as his innovations, and my client relationships as his business development success. The investors asked probing questions about revenue streams, risk management, and competitive positioning, all areas where my expertise had been essential. Then one of the investors, Joseph Harper from Meridian Capital, asked the question that would trigger everything. "This is impressive growth, Mr. Waters. But I notice your business partner isn't presenting today." Lisa Harper was featured prominently in the Tribune article about your company. "Where does she fit in this expansion plan?" Spencer's confident smile never wavered. "Lisa has been transitioning to a more specialized role focused on technical analysis. As we scale up, we need clearer leadership structures. She'll continue providing valuable analytical support while I handle strategic direction and investor relations." "I see," Joseph replied, his expression thoughtful. "And she's comfortable with this transition." This was my moment. "Actually," I said, standing and opening my briefcase, "I think there's been some confusion about my role in this company and this presentation." I began distributing folders to each investor, watching Spencer's face change from confusion to growing alarm as he realized what I was doing. "Gentlemen, what you've just heard is a presentation of stolen intellectual property being offered for sale by someone who has no legal authority to represent Waters and Harper Consulting." The room fell silent except for the sound of investors opening their folders and beginning to read the documentation I'd compiled. "Spencer Waters has spent the past year systematically defrauding both me and the state of Illinois through forged corporate documents, unauthorized business restructuring, and misrepresentation of company ownership." Hugh's face had gone ashen, but Spencer was still trying to salvage the situation. "Lisa, this is inappropriate. We can discuss any concerns you have privately, after you've completed the theft of my company." I interrupted. "I don't think so, Spencer." I turned to address the investors directly. "Everything you've seen today, the financial projections, the client relationships, the analytical frameworks that made this company successful, those were developed by me, using my expertise with my labor. Spencer has been taking credit for my work while systematically erasing my ownership rights." Joseph Harper looked up from the documents, his expression grim. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Waters. Do you have substantiation for these claims?" I smiled, thinking of the boxes of evidence Georgia's team had prepared. "Mr. Harper, I have recordings of Spencer and Hugh planning this fraud, corporate filings with forged signatures, and financial records showing unauthorized asset transfers. This isn't about marital disputes. This is about criminal conspiracy to commit business fraud." The conference room door opened, and Georgia Morrison entered with 2 FBI agents and a photographer from the Tribune. "Gentlemen," Georgia announced, "I'm afraid this meeting is over. Mr. Waters and Mr. Jerome are about to be very busy with law enforcement." The silence in Hugh's conference room was deafening. Spencer stood frozen at the head of the table, his presentation remote still clutched in his hand, while the investors stared at the FBI credentials being displayed. "This is ridiculous," Spencer finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. "Lisa, you're obviously upset about something, but bringing law enforcement into a private business meeting is exactly what happens when someone commits federal wire fraud," Agent Sebastian Waters interrupted, the irony of his surname not lost on anyone in the room. "Mr. Spencer Waters, you're under investigation for conspiracy to commit business fraud, forgery of corporate documents, and unauthorized asset transfers." Hugh had been uncharacteristically quiet, but now he stepped forward with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling difficult situations. "Agents, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. This appears to be a domestic dispute that's gotten out of hand. Perhaps we should allow the couple to resolve their differences privately before involving federal resources." Agent Waters consulted his notes. "Mr. Hugh Jerome, we'd actually like to speak with you as well. Our investigation indicates you've been instrumental in planning and executing this conspiracy." I watched Hugh's confident facade crack as he realized the scope of what we'd uncovered. Spencer looked between Hugh and the agents, confusion replacing his earlier panic. "Hugh, what are they talking about? What conspiracy?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for, when Spencer would finally understand how completely he'd been manipulated. "Spencer," I said, pulling out the folder containing Hugh's real business plan, "you might want to sit down for this." I opened the document that Georgia's investigators had obtained through corporate discovery. "Hugh hasn't been grooming you as a business partner. You've been his exit strategy from the beginning." Spencer's face went white as I read from Hugh's internal planning documents. According to this acquisition plan, Hugh intended to absorb Waters Consulting Group into his real estate empire once the ownership transfer was complete. "You were never going to be an equal partner. You were going to be a mid-level employee in his organization." "That's not true," Spencer said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Hugh, tell them that's not true." Hugh's silence was answer enough. "The investor meeting you planned for today," I continued. "Hugh's people were going to fund the acquisition of our company, eliminate you as a decision maker, and absorb our client relationships into his existing operations. You've been working for months to steal my company so that Hugh could steal it from both of us." The investors were quietly gathering their materials and moving toward the door, clearly wanting no part of what was unfolding. Joseph Harper paused beside my chair. "Mrs. Waters, if you're interested in legitimate investment discussions, once this legal situation is resolved, Meridian Capital would be very interested in meeting with you. As the investors filed out, Spencer slumped into his chair, finally understanding the magnitude of his situation. Lisa, I never meant for any of this to happen. Hugh convinced me that restructuring the business was necessary for growth. I thought I was protecting our future. Protecting our future? I asked, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. Spencer, you forged my signature on life insurance policies. You had me followed by private investigators. You've been planning to eliminate me from every aspect of our life together. The FBI agents were conferring with Georgia, reviewing the evidence that would support federal charges. Hugh was making phone calls to what I assumed were his attorneys. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Spencer, Agent Waters said, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights were read, Spencer looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Complete defeat mixed with something that might have been remorse. Lisa, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me, Spencer. You wanted to erase me. There's a difference. Hugh was escorted out first, his lawyer already demanding to know the specific charges. Spencer followed, no longer the confident consultant who'd been presenting stolen dreams 30 minutes earlier. As the conference room emptied, I stood alone among the scattered presentation materials and abandoned coffee cups, surrounded by the wreckage of Spencer's ambitions and Hugh's manipulations. Jenny Kelly appeared in the doorway, her photographer capturing the scene of documents and evidence that told the story of corporate conspiracy. This is going to be front-page news tomorrow, she said. Female entrepreneur exposes husband's business fraud conspiracy. How does it feel to have fought back and won? I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the company I'd built, and the marriage I'd lost, and the future I was about to reclaim. 6 months later, I stood in the corner office that had once been Spencer's, watching the sunrise paint the Chicago River in shades of gold and amber. The nameplate on my door now read, Lisa Harper, CEO, Miter Harper Consulting Solutions, and the view had never looked better. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly once the FBI finished their investigation. Spencer pled guilty to federal fraud charges and received 3 years in minimum security prison, along with complete forfeiture of any claims to our business assets. Hugh faced more serious charges related to conspiracy and racketeering, with his real estate empire currently under federal oversight. The Tribune article had run as the front-page story for 3 consecutive days, turning me into an unlikely symbol of entrepreneurial resilience. Local woman exposes husband's business conspiracy had generated dozens of interview requests and speaking opportunities. More importantly, it had attracted the attention of clients who valued integrity over manipulation. Joseph Harper from Meridian Capital had indeed followed through on his interest, bringing me a $50 million development consulting contract that dwarfed anything Spencer had ever imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me that Hugh's failed acquisition attempt had actually positioned me for the kind of success he'd been promising Spencer. My phone buzzed with a text from Georgia Morrison. Divorce finalized. House is yours. Business is yours. Future is yours. Congratulations on your freedom. I'd kept the house in Lincoln Park but completely redecorated it, erasing every trace of Spencer's presence. The home office where we'd once planned our shared future was now my private sanctuary, decorated with awards and recognition from clients who appreciated having a consultant who actually did the work she claimed credit for. The business had thrived beyond my wildest projections. Without Spencer's need for constant validation and Hugh's manipulative influence, I'd been able to focus on what I did best, solving complex problems with innovative financial strategies. I'd hired 5 new employees, all of them women who'd been marginalized in their previous positions. Jenny Waters, my new operations director, had left her previous firm after discovering they'd been systematically underpaying female employees. Gina Kelly, my senior analyst, had been passed over for promotion 7 times at her old company, despite consistently outperforming her male colleagues. Together, we'd built something Spencer never could have imagined, a consulting firm that succeeded through collaboration, transparency, and genuine expertise rather than manipulation and stolen credit. A knock on my office door interrupted my morning reflection. "Mrs. Harper, there's someone here to see you. Says he has a business proposition." Standing in my reception area was Spencer, dressed in a modest gray suit that looked nothing like the designer clothing he'd favored during his corporate fraud days. Prison had changed him, thinner, quieter, with an air of genuine humility that was completely foreign to the man I'd married. I gestured for Spencer to sit in one of the client chairs facing my desk, noting how he waited for permission before settling into the seat. The power dynamic had shifted completely. He was now the supplicant in the office that had once been his kingdom. "You look well," he said, glancing around at the awards and recognition certificates that covered my walls. "Business seems to be thriving." "It is," I replied simply. "What can I do for you, Spencer?" He shifted uncomfortably, clearly rehearsing words he'd practiced. "I'm starting a small consulting practice, nothing that would compete with Harper Solutions. Just local small business advisory work. I need character references from previous professional associations." The request was stunning in its audacity. After stealing my company, forging my signature, and potentially planning my death, Spencer was asking me to help him rebuild his career. "You want me to provide a reference letter for the man who committed fraud against me?" Spencer's face flushed, but he pressed on. "I know how that sounds. But Lisa, we worked well together for 3 years before everything went wrong. That collaborative success was real, even if what came after was inexcusable." I studied his face, searching for the man I'd once loved. He was there, buried under the consequences of his choices, but fundamentally changed by the experience of losing everything he'd tried to steal. "What happened to Hugh?" I asked. 15 years federal prison. His real estate empire collapsed when the investigation revealed decades of fraudulent practices. Apparently, we weren't his first victims. Spencer paused, meeting my eyes for the first time since entering my office. "I was an idiot, Lisa. Hugh convinced me that I deserved more than partnership, that I was capable of running everything myself. I let ambition and ego destroy the best thing in my life." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a framed photograph, our original business license from Waters and Harper Consulting, the document that had started everything between us. "Do you remember signing this?" I asked. Of course, we were so excited about building something together. Equal partners, equal decision-making, equal respect. I set the frame aside and picked up a pen. "I'll write your reference letter, Spencer. But not because of what we once had together." His face lit up with hope and relief. "I'll write it because the woman who poured coffee while you called her just administrative support is gone forever. In her place is someone who succeeds by helping others rather than destroying them." I handed him a business card with my personal contact information. "The reference will be honest. It will acknowledge your skills while noting that you're rebuilding after making serious professional mistakes. If you've truly changed, that should be enough." Spencer stood to leave, then paused at my office door. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built here. This is the kind of success we should have achieved together. This is the kind of success I achieved because I refused to be eliminated by someone who underestimated me." I corrected gently. "Sometimes the best partnerships end when one person becomes strong enough to succeed alone." After Spencer left, I returned to my window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Hugh was beginning what would likely be the rest of his life in federal prison. Spencer was starting over with nothing but the skills he'd once used to betray me. And I was sitting in an office that bore my name, leading a company built on my vision, surrounded by people who respected my expertise rather than trying to steal it. The woman who'd been dismissed as just a pretty face had become the CEO who read every contract, questioned every assumption, and never again trusted anyone else to protect what she'd built. Some lessons come at a steep price. But as it turned out, I was very good at collecting what I was owed.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.